Our next topic is individual and market demand. So it turns out that the market demand curve for a product is the sum of the individual demand curves. So what does that mean? Let's think about a world with two consumers, Joe and Susie. Let's think about the product apples, and let's think about various different prices of apples. So for example, if the price of apples were $5, then Joe, as you can see in this table, would want to buy one apple, let's say, per week, whereas Susie wouldn't want to buy any. If only Joe and Susie, they were the only two people in the economy, then the total quantity sold at that price of $5 per apple would be 1. That's just the sum of the 1 and the 0. It gets us to the last column with a 1. Suppose instead that the price were $3 per apple, then Joe would want to buy 2 and Susie would want to buy 1. The sum of 2 and 1 is 3. So the market demand curve for apples would show a quantity of 3 at a price of 3. Suppose now that the price were even lower, $1 per apple, then Joe would want to buy 3, Susie would want to buy 2, and the sum of those two, 3 plus 2, would be 5. So the market demand curve quantity at a price of 1 would be 5. Finally, if the price were 50 cents per apple, Joe would want to buy 4, Susie would want to buy 3, and the total quantity on the market demand curve at a price of 50 cents would be 7. Here we see a picture that illustrates the idea we had in the table on the previous slide. Again, the idea is that the market demand curve for a product is the horizontal sum of the individual demand curves. So you see here 3 demand curves. The maroon is Joe, the gold is Susie, and the gray is the market. If we just want to focus in for a second, we see that at that price of $3, Joe wants 2 units, Susie wants 1, and 2 plus 1 is 3, so then market demand at a price of 3 is 3 units. Consider some other price of $1. Joe wants 3 units, Susie wants 2. 3 and 2 combined are 5, so market demand at a price of $1 per apple is 5. Now, in problems in this course, we tend to work with straight line or linear demand curves, for example, P equals 100 minus Q, or P equals 80 minus 2Q, or whatever. But suppose we're working with that P equals 100 minus Q. Let's just talk about how we would graph that. So we've got a picture here with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal, as we so often do in this course. The price intercept with this particular demand curve, P equals 100 minus Q, is 100, and the slope of this demand curve is minus 1. As a result, it hits the quantity axis at 100 as well. Now, if we think about horizontally summing linear demand curves, so suppose we had a linear demand curve, P equals 100 minus Q as the demand curve for person 1, and the demand curve P equals 40 minus 0.5Q as the demand curve for person 2, well, we could horizontally sum them to get to that gray demand curve in the picture down below. Now, to get the market demand curves, what we need to do is to actually first express them as Q equals and then just add them up. Let me show you what I mean. From before, we had person 1 with the demand curve P equals 100 minus Q. Well, now let's make a distinction between Q1 and Q2, with Q1 being the quantity purchased by person 1. And so if we do that and solve that first person's demand curve for Q1, we get Q1 equals 100 minus P. Person 2's demand curve from the previous slide is P equals 40 minus 0.5 times Q2. If we solve that for Q2, we get that Q2 equals 80 minus 2P. Well, to get the market demand curve, if there are just these 2 people in the market, we want to sum up that QT, the total quantity, is Q1 plus Q2. So just writing down below there in the box, Q1 equals 100 minus P, Q2 equals 80 minus 2P, and then below the black line, we're summing everything up. QT equals Q1 plus Q2, and that 180 is 100 plus 80, and then finally that minus 3P, we get that from the minus P up above plus the minus 2P in the second demand curve. Anyways, that's an expression then for the market demand curve with just these 2 people. We're not quite done because we generally like to express it as P equals. So if we solve for P over here, we divide through by 3, we get, and do a little flipping around, we get P equals 180 over 3. minus 1/3 times Q, or a little bit simplified, P equals 60 minus 1/3 Q. If we want to split hairs, we can point out, though, that this is really just the demand curve when both consumers are in the market. And notice back up at the person 2 demand curve, at a price above 40, person 2 wouldn't be buying anything. So this is actually just the demand curve when both consumers are purchasing positive quantities. So it's the demand curve for price less than or equal to 40. So here we see that the horizontal sum of the demand curves of person 1 and person 2. And yes, indeed, the market demand curve is the horizontal sum of the individual's demand curve. Now, in real life, so to speak, we have hundreds and hundreds of people whose demand curves we'd be summing up. But in our little examples, we're illustrating it as though there were just 2 people in the economy. So the takeaways. First idea is that the market demand curve for a product is the horizontal sum of individual demand curves for that product. When we're actually trying to work problems of this sort, the way we get the market demand curve is by expressing the individual demand curves in terms of quantity and then adding those quantities up. That's how we do horizontal summation.